Welcome everyone, and thank you for joining us today. This is BHN's first webinar of 2023, and we're kicking off a new series with a session on sensory hotel design. If you haven't joined in one of my webinars before, I'm Eloise Hanson. I'm the editor of Boutique Hotel News, and I will be moderating today's conversation. BHN is a global B2B platform serving the boutique, lifestyle and luxury hotel industry. Today's sponsor is Like Magic. Like Magic is a white label hospitality solution which was originally built for the hotel brand Stay Cook. The platform provides a fully integrated digital guest journey via a mobile web app and equips employees with the tools they need to proactively support their guests. It's one solution from one provider at one price per month. And you can find the company's website and contact details in the chat if you would like to learn more about Like Magic. It's now my time to hand over to our panelists today, who will be giving a short introduction before we move into our conversation. And I'm going to ask each to introduce themselves as they appear on our PowerPoint slide here from left to right, which means I'm going to be kicking off with Jo. Welcome, and how are you doing?
I'm well, thank you, Eloise. How are you?
Yeah, all very well, thank you. So please go ahead and introduce yourself.
So my name is Jo Littlefair. Together with Martin Goddard, we founded Goddard Littlefair in 2012. We are a London-based interior design firm, and we specialise in 5-star and 4-star hotels across the world. And we also have a strong amount of work in residential design, predominantly with developers. And we've been very fortunate to have a lot of spa and wellness work on our journey, and have consistently therefore pushed our knowledge and understanding of the way we as human beings are evolving at the moment and what we are needing from our environment. So I'm really delighted to be on this panel.
We were just talking pre-call that there's evidently lots to learn from this topic. So I, for one, am very looking much to diving in and getting our teeth stuck in. But before we do, Ari, over to you next, please.
Hello, my name is Ari Peralta. I'm a Harvard-trained neuroscientist and sensory designer. And basically, I help with working with brands and organizations from around the world, optimizing environments, queuing up sensory stimulation, to really enhance people's behavior, people's mindset, collective mindset, and create experiences that are deeper, more meaningful, and richer.
Wonderful. Thanks, Ari. And Tom, last but not least, over to you.
Hi, I'm Tom Thorogood, co-head of interiors at Studio Morin. So Studio Morin is a London-based architecture and interior studio. We specialise in hospitality, mainly 4-star and 5-star hotels, and also build-to-rent properties as well.
Fantastic. Thank you, Tom. And the LinkedIn profiles to all our panelists have been popped into the chat there, and I actively encourage you to carry on this conversation, ask those questions ahead of this webinar once we've finished. Just to give you guys a quick recap of how this webinar is going to run, we're going to spend around 45 minutes in discussion with our panelists, and we'll take some time at the end for any questions from the floor. So anyone that's in the audience today tuning in live, if you have any questions, please submit these using the Q&A function, and I will get round to this at the end. And as a gentle reminder, this webinar is being recorded, and every registrant will receive a copy of that recording within a couple of days' time. Now, before we dive into this conversation that we're all very eager to have, I always like to flag some context, and these are effectively stories that I have published or we have published on Boutique Hotel News. And these top two stories, I believe, are good examples of how wellness, health and fitness is being incorporated into hotel and resort brand standards. So top right story here, Lanzerhof is an established health resort and last summer opened its latest property in Germany. And some key design features of this property include sustainable non-emitting materials in the architecture, and select rooms feature fresh bed technology, which I understand controls the climate of when you are sleeping. And also some rooms have a human-centric lighting concept, which keeps guests in sync with their natural biorhythm. And similarly, 01 Zabil is a new brand from Kerzner International, and this property is launching later this year. It's described as an immersive lifestyle brand, which I understand seems to root itself in the types of the treatments that it offers. And for example, we have 3D body scans, infrared and oxygen therapy, and a dedicated recovery lab. And something that we might explore today is whether interior design can help to support and improve health, healing, and recovery. And on the next slide, I've taken some headlines from other media sources to show how sensory design is shaping other sectors too. And I think that designers could find great opportunity within offices due to the need to make these spaces more appealing, ergonomic, social, multi-purpose. You can add to the list as you see fit. And this middle headline, which reads, "Why biology first thinking is key to modern workplace design." This article highlights how sensory elements such as light, noise, visual displays, and more play a prominent role in satisfaction, productivity, and overall health. So what can we learn, and how do we apply this to the hotel sector? Let's talk about sensory hotel design. And I would like to kick off with an opening question to Ari, please. Given your background, how would you describe sensory design? What are those fundamentals that make up sensory hotel design?
So in its simplest form, Eloise, multisensory design seeks to create and bring harmony with the visuals that we're experiencing. In other words, through a combination of specific sensory cues in order to deliver those more meaningful and comprehensive experiences that we know we are seeking. Now, there's some complexity behind this because each person decodes that information in slightly a different way. But that's how we define our world. That's how we define our reality. And it's through those competencies, through our culture, through our biology, through our mental models, is that we can really elevate sensory design and hospitality. Now, I want to make clear we're visually dominant beings. So it's no surprise that for most of history, we focus more on really appealing those visual arts, our response to paintings, to sculptures, to architecture, amongst other things. And today, let's just say that while our interfaces are changing, being much more digital interfaces, advertising, shown as images, but we're still visiocentric. And this is where we have an opportunity to look at sensory design beyond that of vision. Advances in neuroscience and neuroaesthetics, which is what we focus at Origami, they've helped us expand our understanding of how the actual senses work. And what we know is that when you understand how the senses work, you really get a better understanding of how we work as people. The senses talk, they influence one another, they compete with one another. And it's fascinating to look at sensory design almost as a language. And ultimately for us, it's a new, interesting layer in this field of design. And I think this multisensory trend within hospitality offers us really this alternative to this visual centric culture, and really this commitment that in design and architecture, we're always looking towards innovations, towards technology that allows us to scale those innovations. But ultimately, it's about unlocking that understanding and that interpretation. And we know that this isn't limited to one or two senses.
Thanks, Ari. Thanks for that introduction. And Joe, when we came round to promoting this webinar, and I think you mentioned it in your introduction as well, that that Goddard Little Fair takes a human perspective or a human approach when it comes to the projects that you work on. Can you elaborate on this and perhaps flesh it out in parallel with sensory hotel design?
Yeah, sure. I mean, I think we are, categorically interior designers. Sometimes we have architects come on board, but they're very much people who see spaces from the inside out rather than the converse to that. And obviously we work in collaboration with architects all the time. And I think there's a lovely conversation about how those two worlds meet and what the optimum situation is there. But for us, we're always thinking about the human side and how people interact with their interior spaces, rather than, say, for example, a bird flying over a property, how does it look from the outside? For, a person on the inside can't really, that's not tangible. It may look beautiful, but, it needs, for us, it has to deliver something to the human beings that inhabit it. And I think optimizing their experiences in a way that are really subliminal, that they don't realize that, they've walked into a space and perhaps they feel a weight's lifted off them because they're in a space that's clutter-free, perhaps, or clean lined, or converse to that, you could go somewhere and it's, a celebration of color and warmth and texture, and you feel cocooned and welcomed and immersed in that environment. So I think we're very aware that the interiors we create can have effects on moods and how we feel and so on, down to things like artwork. And it's really interesting listening to you, Ari, and what, all of those things, that hearing that we are predominantly visual. Fabulous. I mean, that's great. That's probably why art was so important. People can then interpret things in their own way. It's very, as you said, spaces are very individual, and that's complex, right? But a piece of art, you can have your own experience and take that away from that experience as well, which is fab. But yeah, all of the other senses that we've been learning about over the course of our company's establishment, things like smell, things like sound, tactility, all of these things are wonderful layers that we can build up to create the experience that we want to curate for the people that inhabit the spaces, and create really unique aesthetics as well, because of those complexities. So it's something that's evolving constantly. I think as we evolve as human beings, technology around us, that's a huge interplay, of course, with how we design with senses in mind. So I think there's just so much in this sphere that is fascinating and constantly going to change. So it's really exciting.
You've just almost hit the nail on the head there, Jo, that with behaviours having shifted quite a lot over the last 3 years, I would imagine that the role of the designer / architect has had to adapt alongside this, where what we now demand and seek and need from our spaces has shifted too. So whether we can whether there's an answer to these questions, we could ask the same. We could always host the same webinar in 3 years' time and be having maybe an altogether different conversation. But staying with you, Jo, how do you think increased awareness of well-being is shaping design principles?
Well, I think from my perspective as well, I think we're hugely aware how, the impact of modern life. I think the pace of life is incredibly fast. Thanks to technology, that's wonderful, and it facilitates lots of things, but it also puts pressures on us that as human beings, we've evolved over centuries and we haven't evolved as quickly as technology has. So we're sort of grappling to sort of cope with the speed that life is going at, and all of these constant notifications and adrenaline rushes that we're getting off of our technology, or demands, and people expect things so quickly. So in a reaction to that, I think our mental health has become a real front runner of the sort of a symptom of things that we need to address and pay attention to. Otherwise, we are going to be unwell. And so that then drives us as designers to think about spaces and how we create spaces where we can create that level of calm and response to sort of like the antidote to some of those technological demands that we have. And yeah, it's fascinating to see how that will play out. But, you know, for example, we're working on the Raffles Spa in London, and which is a beautiful space. We're, you know, really excited for its launch later this year. When COVID hit, we were asked to sort of think about designing some wellness suites to work with that, so that actually people could enjoy elements of the spa in their own room and not feel that they had to be down in the spa with everybody else if they felt that was too much. So, I mean, that evolved very quickly in a reaction to COVID. And I think there are things that, you know, COVID has sort of brought about to us as well, in terms of being aware of our senses, that will keep going and will have a legacy.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Jo. Talking about designing space and activating spaces, Tom, I'm going to bring you into the conversation here. How do you think sensory design is influencing the ways in which hotel space is activated?
So with regards to that, it's when you are designing a space, I mean, you straight away start with the layout, and then the main rule is just making sure that every element of that space has something that activates it. And that can be anything from the big elements, such as in the arrivals, like the reception desk, that kind of adds that kind of buzz to the space, to a fireplace, which kind of changes the way that you feel. So it could create kind of like a cozy area, because you've kind of got that temperature change, or a water feature, which kind of gets that kind of sound element across, and kind of that calming element. And it's when you are designing the space, it's also kind of making sure visually it's not just this sea of loose tables. You kind of add that interest to the space as well. So, I mean, for example, when you're designing a restaurant, you kind of always start with kind of the bar area, so that you're welcoming people in, and it kind of adds that kind of theatre to the space. And you've got kind of the buzz and the noise of the drinks being made, and kind of the taste of the drinks, all of that element. And then as you kind of go through the space, you've got the music, you've got kind of visually the way that the furniture is laid out, you've got the wine displays, things like that. And then you obviously get to kind of an open kitchen, so it kind of re-adds that theatrical space in, and then adds kind of the smells and that interaction between the space. And I guess as well, I mean, one of the key things is definitely kind of lighting throughout the spaces, and how that kind of enables flexibility throughout the day as well, and kind of changes and pushes guests into feeling kind of a certain way and utilizing the space in a certain way. So it can go from kind of a co-working space during the day to kind of getting moodier in the evening, and becoming kind of this lively bar that's just a bit more atmospheric. And it's just making sure that when we design, we allow for all those different levels of lighting. So you've got your ceiling lights, your wall lights, your floor lamps, your table lamps, so that you do have the opportunity to play around with those lighting levels and create those different atmospheres.
It's going back to what I think Ari was mentioning at the beginning, and I think Jo played on it as well, with how we interpret art. It's so subjective and so personalized that having to design for a specific group of people is at once an incredibly inclusive, exclusive dilemma, in that particularly when it comes to brand standards. I would imagine when hoteliers or hotel brands have a certain idea of what they want and the kind of demographic that they would like to serve, I would imagine it being quite a creative challenge as to how do you make that space exclusive but inclusive at the same time. Tom, what role does design play in driving that brand loyalty amongst guests?
With regards to design, I guess the main thing comes down to kind of familiarity, and kind of, even though every kind of hotel will visually kind of look different, it's getting those aspects that guests kind of can acknowledge and kind of reminisce, or just, yeah, getting that familiarity with the space. So it's kind of things like, for certain brands, it's the level of detail that you go into, or the level of finishes. I mean, whether like with the 4-star lifestyle properties, it's things like they include more vintage furniture, and it's pieces like that that kind of the guests can kind of, they may not like wholly kind of understand or acknowledge, but they'll kind of get that feeling that it's that yeah, it's kind of adding that vintage effect in. But I mean, for one of the brands that we're working with is Western, and with them it's a lot about kind of organic forms, natural materials and textures, and within their kind of arrival spaces, even though they all look very different, they have certain elements that are kind of constantly brought in. So they always have their kind of quiet area to the arrival lobby that is kind of screened off. So it kind of, it allows guests to feel different ways. And they've got kind of the panoramic sofa to enjoy the views. They've got the well, it's called, and it's kind of like their cozy lounge area that also has a drink station with like the flavored waters and kind of adding that element to it, as well as like the welcome drinks. And so it's kind of it's elements like that that I guess kind of give that familiarity, even though the design will look very different, that kind of gives that brand loyalty and that guests can kind of appreciate.
Thanks, Tom. Ari, I'm hoping you can build off what Tom's just said, but also what we've all talked about thus far to a certain degree, in how might understanding the human senses help to design environments which elicit a specific response. And I mentioned earlier, I used The Office as an example, and how certain elements or certain additions within that space might help to drive productivity. For example, Jo's just been highlighting her work with the spa, and Tom, what you've just mentioned about making spaces feel welcome or relaxed. How can understanding these senses help to design environments that elicit a very specific response?
So the first step I would recommend to any client and any partner and anyone attending this great panel is you have to take 2 steps back and unlearn what you think you know. That's number one, because a lot of the assumptions that we've made have been really diluted just due to marketing and pseudoscience over the past few decades, where a lot of the assumptions that we've made on things like color, on things like light, on things like what are the senses and what are they not, we have to re-educate ourselves there. And what I can say is that combining the 3 different careers that I've combined, it's allowed me to see the senses in a very unique way. Back to what I was saying earlier, I see it as a language. And we have different types of sensory receptors. So I don't even see it as sensory organs anymore. We have these biological receptors that transform signals. So I'm looking at what are these signals? And these signals are what we call light, are what we call sound and vibration and motion, temperature, what we call pain as well, which is a sense. And, you know, when we start exploring, and chemical, obviously, it's how we explore scent and taste. But when I look at signals, what it shows me is that today we are in need of creating sensory roadmaps, in need of developing improved sensory intelligence. Most importantly, we're in need of looking at and evolving sensory design from 1.0 to 2.0. So I'd like to share what I see that as. And I think both of the examples that were laid out by Jo and Tom really show us where 2.0 is headed. So let's go back and look at 1.0, where hotel designs mostly sit today. We're making a conscious effort to create some kind of fixed sensory setting or develop a signature scent, something along those lines that allows us to remember that property. It's still two-dimensional because it's dictated rather than co-created with the guests themselves. This is where we enter sensory design 2.0, where there's a greater focus on the individual by personalizing the sensory deliveries that we provide to that individual and creating recipes that work for that person, that promotes behavioral change. Going back to Joe's incredible example of Raffles, who's really been a leader in the market investing in sleep science, but also looking at Tom's example with Westin, part of the Marriott International Group, who's been an incredible leader in circadian lighting and in lighting design in particular. So what you're seeing are brands starting to, okay, we've created the signature 1.0. People have some kind of association and brand recognition across these different sensory elements. But today we're needing now to use these sensory cues in a personalized way to become more predictive than prescriptive, inviting, right, people to participate in that behavioral change or behavioral journey. So the senses are complex because each of us have innate preferences. So that already makes it challenging. And without the aid of technology, most of us as designers, we were just stuck doing the best we could with the best information we could, creating what we call evidence-based design, human-centered design, whatever you want to call it. It's just been the same of the same. Now, that's no longer the case. Now, sensory design for me is a kind of revolution that touches, literally, no pun intended, on what it means to be human, regardless of the environment you're in. And what I see is that besides this being an incredible tool to fine-tune environments and to help us shift mindset or mental models that keep us stuck in anger and anxiety and loneliness, because the thing is, it's not just sensory overstimulation that's affecting us. You look at seniors and it's sensory understimulation that's affecting also these communities. This is also the most democratic way, if you will, of designing, because we're now opening up to designing for neurodiverse people. We're now opening up to welcoming guests such as deaf communities, such as blind communities, to have similar experiences to what everyone has described. Ultimately, we are living 94+% of our time indoors, either in a building, in our home, in our office, in a vehicle. That's a lot. So similar to what Joe said, where, we have this Moore's law in full mode going on with technology, we need a Moore's law for humans so that we can keep up. Ultimately, we're the ones creating the technology that computes things faster than our brain can. We're the ones moving in vehicles faster than what we can walk. And what most designers don't know is the one following tip or major kind of revelation that I'll bring you from a neuroscience angle. And it's that we are built to take in multi-sensory signals, but from one direction. Think about that for a second. And think about that in terms of the design and architecture of the spaces, of the products, of the environments that we create today. It's designed with that first notion, yes, we can take in multiple signals, but it's not designed around one direction. And that's what's really accelerating that sense of time and space. So some of the best ways that I recommend for brands to really start pivoting into what I call sensory wellness is looking into circadian lighting. Right? This is something that will become standard anywhere we're at. Ultimately, I think there's a unique opportunity that's left maybe for the next 3-5 years to ride on the wellness bandwagon. But beyond that, what happens when we're all focused on wellness, which is what we should be? Anywhere there's humans, there's an opportunity to optimize wellness. So circadian lighting, to me, it's going to continue to evolve. And just to make that simple for everyone who might not know what that means, we have these natural biorhythms, and we connect to the life cycle, if you will, to the day-night cycle of the sun. It's something that every life form on Earth has a relationship to. not only our brain, but all 6.4 trillion cells of our body are receptive to that. So if we coordinate lighting to mirror the types of gradual changes that happen in the colored lighting of the sun, that's already a win. Investing in water and air quality solutions. We don't think about these as sensory elements, but they are, and they help us complete the well-being design of the space. I think it's very important to note that through the examples that Tom mentioned, through the examples that Joe mentioned, if you remove the sensory, if you remove the technology, what's there? It's trying to recreate nature, the nature effect biophilia, right? And this is where the senses, this is where our mission at Origami is. How do we help organizations, environments, architects, designers, name it, really fine tune how to exemplify the best of nature inside spaces and products? And it's not going to just be the visual. We have that down. It's going to be through the systems underneath, what we can't see, but what we feel. And if we look to nature and see all of its benefits, it's important to remind ourselves that it's the ultimate multisensory healing device. So creating spaces that work contextually with the environmental landscape, paying a close attention to the music and sounds that you're playing, making sure that it makes sense to what you are presenting there. Ultimately, what this means is that you're requiring less brain energy, to make it just simple, for the guest to enjoy the experience. And that's where we're trying to remove this cognitive overload that we've created through today's design. So ultimately, it's about ensuring it makes sense, no pun intended again, but it's all about context and making sure that it's congruent. When we're using the senses to mask a space, you can do that, but just make sure it makes sense to what the objective, what the behavioral expectation, and also what the person's baseline is. Some of the technologies that are allowing us to scale this, right, besides the lighting systems, besides the water and air purification systems, et cetera, don't exist. That's the problem. We have the best sound system, ambisonics. We have the best maybe lighting system, but do they communicate? No. And it's time we go back to who we are and what we are. We are walking sensors that communicate constantly. And as Tom shared earlier, just like as his environment at the West End changed throughout the day, creating different environmental factors, well, that makes a difference for us. And guess what? If we're playing something as simple as birdsong, which we know is effective, but you're playing the morning birdsong at night, our brain can tell the difference. It's minor things like that that make a big impact.
Anecdotally, I will share something with my fellow panelists, but also attendees. I used to work in hotels before I became a journalist, and one of the biggest complaints that I would receive from guests was that the music wasn't right. And my team members would be able to see me heading across the lobby, asking them to change it. And they would know immediately, no, gosh, we've got to change the music again, because it is so important. And I think, I know, Ari, you mentioned that we are visually, visually we are, that's our most important sense, but perhaps the most amplified. Music has such a major role to play in helping setting that scene and set that environment. As we are halfway through our webinar, I'm going to highlight again to our audience that if you have any questions for our panelists, please do submit these using the Q&A function. But Ari, I would like to stick with you for a moment here. You highlighted that the technology doesn't quite exist in terms of meeting the needs of sensory design, but you help to highlight some products such as lighting. I think you mentioned something around music and sound, but could you talk us through what are those innovative products and solutions that do exist that are helping to meet the demands of sensory design?
I think that's where we come in as an organization, Origami. And as I mentioned earlier, we focus mostly on 3 different ways of supporting what's to meet and fulfill, if you will, no pun intended, on minding the gap between the technology that is there available to be scaled and the disconnect, if you will, with the design world. I think it's important to kind of first set this tone that hospitality is on the verge of unrecognizable transformation. And from someone from a systems perspective who's working connecting things, it's interesting to see the influence of change that not just sensory design is having, but also other technologies like the metaverse, augmented reality, and gaming in particular, entering the hospitality realm. This is where we're helping clients either one, build sensory roadmaps, really fine-tuning the sensory footprint that they're making, and really creating a much more synergized and behavioral approach towards that design. The second way we're helping clients is really through identifying different types of sensory technologies that we can start profiling their customers and guests with, so that they can start making a little bit more of fine-tuned decisions when it comes to creating generalized sensory settings. And with technologies like AR, I think this is one of the most promising technologies for us as designers, because I think it'll give us the ability to add sensory layers, if you will, directly through the devices in which we experience these environments. And once we're wearing glasses as we wear smartwatches, if you will, we'll be able to, let's say, fine-tune the perceived sensory elements of that space. And it's really about going from hotel building to mind building is really the quest now. But I think it's important to note that we have a potential to rethink of what a hotel is. And I think one of the points that Joe made earlier, it's not so much about one technology. She mentioned something about evolving wellness out of the spa. It's something actually we have on our website as well. Evolve it out of the spa and into other areas and hotel zones. The bedroom is such a perfect space for us to create a chamber, a multisensory chamber of experiences. Some of the technologies that I've been fortunate enough to help advise on and support include, for example, my Cocoon chromotherapy lighting, which is non-flickering wellness lighting that suddenly can make a hotel room into a chromotherapy space. Also working with organizations like Maya, who's introducing more of a Gen Z and millennial approach to wellness music beyond yoga music, if you will, so more into the dance sphere. Organizations, really fun, exciting projects like with Sanctum, who's based in the Netherlands, creating new combination multisensory fitness experiences where we're using sensory cues to reduce peak fatigue. So again, we're using the senses in so many different ways, and it's not so much that the technology is not there. It's a combination of the infrastructure in hotels needs to change to support these kinds of projects that may require servers and ongoing expenses, et cetera. So currently the infrastructure doesn't support many projects like this beyond marketing. Two, it's really building business models within those wellness chambers, if you will, or bedrooms and spaces, creating different collaborations, I think is key. So instead of hotels, which I'll say this with all respect, but Weston invested a lot of money in lighting, more than probably what made it into the final room, because it ended up too expensive. So part of it is this feasibility trick. And I think when it comes to feasibility about how we can use the senses, it's really understanding what are the sensory inputs that are important for you, and you controlling that by collaborating with the best in that business versus trying to create it yourself. And I think that that's where most of these companies are at right now, where we're all having the similar conversations. But it's organizations like ours, like Origami, that's bringing them to the table and saying, okay, let's create a project plan to make this work. Ultimately, regardless of how expensive that bed at Raffles is, how incredible that circadian lighting is, or how effective that ambisonic sound is, if the temperature's off, it throws everything else off. So it's important to understand that the senses work, but they're very delicate. And ultimately, they are physical, but they're also perceptual. So there are other ways that we can influence and almost change people's perceptual field of a flavor, of a color, of a scent. And this is where I think designers have a really interesting subfield within sensory design of creating synesthetic journeys that, again, break us out of the AI pre-programmed algorithmic world and into this more serendipitous, nature-like effect.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's hear some thoughts of the designers and the architects that are with us. Tom, how is the role of the designer shifting in response to new technologies?
So I think one way is actually during the design process, there was like, I've worked on a hotel where actually the architect took the building and created a full kind of VR model, and everyone, including like the designers, the client, everyone actually kind of was in the VR suite and kind of with the goggles, everything, and actually like fully understanding and appreciating what we can and can't do with the building, because it was actually a listed building that unfortunately had burnt down, but it had uncovered a lot of other elements. And actually they modeled all these up, and it was quite interesting to work and see all of these kind of in that sense. But I think one thing to kind of be wary about that is making sure that actually it doesn't become, so when you are doing kind of a mock-up room, it doesn't become an alternative for the mock-up room. It needs to be done as a process before the construction of the mock-up room, as an additional kind of reviewing tool, because there's so many things you cannot actually review or fully understand, kind of comfort levels and actually how you're using the space. You can't get those. And so it's just understanding that it needs to be done together and not instead of.
Mm-hmm. I actually hosted a webinar not too long ago on the metaverse, and how hotels and hotel brands are entering the metaverse. And would you believe it? There are air rights that exist in the metaverse, and this one hotel brand was limited or restricted to building their hotel 3 stories high, which to me is totally baffling. And off the back of this webinar, I recently wrote a feature. What I expect will shape hotels and the wider travel landscape in 2023. And I put digital twins in there because I could see a great opportunity. And I believe that that's alike or akin to what you were talking about, Tom, there, and Ari as well, as to what opportunities are presented by these digital virtual worlds and mock-ups. Joe, to bring you in here, and we won't be going along the metaverse route, so don't worry. But I mentioned it earlier about hotel brands and trying to design exclusive but also inclusive spaces. How does the consistency of hotel brand standards challenge the expanding and evolving parameters of sensory hotel design?
Yeah, well, hotel brands are, I think they have a competition amongst themselves really as well, trying to create clear space for one another. And obviously their brand standards sort of help dictate and describe those elements for them. And I think traditionally, when I first came into the industry, it's telephone directory style brand standards that you had to conform to. Now, obviously, I think that ultimately these standards, there's an aspiration that people will be able to go into hotels and have, a sofa at a correct height, a dining table that will fit the afternoon tea, or, for example, things like this. I feel now that more and more brand standards, certainly at the luxury end where we predominantly work, there is flexibility and open-mindedness to really think about, where things are appropriate and where things aren't, and sort of flex with that. And I think if it delivers a more authentic experience for the guest, and I know that's a well-traveled word, the well-used word, authentic, but when Ari was talking, it's one that I wrote down about authenticity and connection. I think that's another sense of that feeling that you belong somewhere and feeling that you can you're connected to something that's maybe a little bit deep, that you've come to be curious about and inquisitive about, and can you get something from. So I think that's something that I wrote down as a sense that we haven't talked about. But the standards I see, and you know, they are flexible, like things like a television size in a room. If you're going to put a television in there that's way too big and will compromise a heritage aspect of a room or something like that, there's a view taken that actually that's not what people have come for. If they're staying in that type of property, they're there to feel the space, the bones of the building. Actually, don't let the technology overwhelm you. And I see that more and more often. Yeah, the luxury brands are just trying to, if they've got a period property or something that's an absolutely beautiful piece that people are traveling to visit, let the building speak and let everything that we layer on be a complement to that, and just really amplify that sense of the experience. So I think that the brands are, although they're trying to discern their own areas, the right brands have an amount of flexibility with them as well, which is great.
Mm-hmm. And I suppose following on from this, your role as a designer, and I suppose to be aware of what's happening, what's evolving, what's new, what's next. To what extent do you, Jo, look to incorporate design trends into certain projects when you look at the speed of which things change? I understand hoteliers might be a little bit apprehensive when deploying certain technology, knowing that in 3 to 5 years' time, they might have to rip it out and enhance the product again. And then you look at the actual hotel interiors and how they need to be refreshed every 5 to 7 years or so.
So it was really interesting listening to those elements that Ari's talking about with the technology, because I think as early as, 2014, 2015, we were talking about circadian rhythm lighting on a new build hotel, where you have got opportunity to sort of put things like that in, things like getting the blackout seamless, the cocooning spaces, the tactile services, the natural fabrics. Eventually that particular project didn't travel the full length of the journey, probably because of the amount of investment and what have you. And also it was a sustainable project as well. So a lot of it had to have that sort of cradle to grave element. And this was before, way before COVID. And I think we've come out of COVID and everybody's talking about sustainability. It's something that we've been very much, it's sort of something that we hold dear to our hearts, and we try to push through wherever we can. So I think in response to the trend conversation, for us, we've seen spaces through many iterations. I mean, in some points we've come back to hotels and it's, refurbishment time. And you think, I'll take a spa, for example. If you create rooms that are dedicated to specific treatments, each one of them, they look incredibly dated incredibly quickly, and an operator is often invested in something that looks fantastic for about 2 years or something, and then it looks like a dinosaur. It's, so you've really got to be careful. And I think flexibility in design, creating spaces that have a little bit of future proofing about them, they're not so precious that we have to stamp our design footprint on them or the owner's footprint on them and completely close the door for those spaces to operate in a different way in the future, I think is not the right angle. We need to sort of have that openness, and again, it plays into sustainability. If you design, with color schemes, you put the hard finishes into maybe neutrals, and then the softer finishes go into the colors and the trend-led elements. Luckily, interiors is a much slower turnover of trend rather than the fashion world, thank heavens. Just because that's from a sustainable angle, as well as just because actually don't we need some calm in our lives in that. So I think just designing mindfully. I mean, some of our projects have to be really instantaneous hits, and for the zeitgeist, like Mondrian Shoreditch had to hit a sweet spot immediately. F&B spaces, really fast and dynamic spaces where the trend of a chef can disappear in a couple of years.
Yeah.
So you've really got to be respectful of what you're doing in the space. Do the uplift, do the design, make sure it's effective and on the, you know, bang on the money as well for the investor, but also on the trend. So every project is different. Everyone has its own set of demands and what have you. And I think it's being, as a designer, listening to those requests and all the ingredients that come into the mix, and just then creating the best space that we can for the end user as possible.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Jo. We've got a couple of questions here from the audience. So whilst we're edging ever closer to 3 o'clock, I thought I'd work my way through them. Ari, first question for you, my friend. Do you see companies creating their own sensory brand world? Wow, once the technology allows the connection of all our senses.
I see them doing that already. So several of the organizations that we are working with today are investing in building sensory roadmaps, in building sensory profiling tools and systems that better cater to the specific sensory needs. And we're looking at, as we mentioned earlier, how to evolve wellness beyond the spa and into other zones in the hotel room. Things like using the senses to enhance meals and flavors. Which is independent of what kind of chef or what kind of culinary options are available, but also going deeper into using, drawing upon the senses to support a resilient staff, which is a huge issue in hospitality today. So, you know, there are, yes, to answer that question, there is an active interest. What is lacking still is the infrastructure. So I think that the opportunities are clearly there. The evidence is there. But I think the question we need to ask is, what will it take for hospitality to evolve? The market is demanding this. We see this across other sectors, and it's working and bringing in new sources of revenue. But most of that innovation is done in hospitality within concept hotels, and it's rarely scaled. So I think that innovation is in that co-creation. And this is the era of hotel collaboration. And sensory design is just one of many different routes in which that collaboration will happen. But it does require one thing, and it's the right leadership.
Mm-hmm. Ari, I'm going to stick with you for this next question as somebody who might be able to talk more broadly outside of the hotel hospitality landscape. But how might out of home sensory design bring people together so to feel more connected to the bigger picture and impact positively on social urban problems such as isolation and stress?
So, you know, we're going to be using in the future, again, different types of sensory tools and solutions in a form sometimes almost as personalized medicine or wellness interventions. Ultimately, what I want to bring up is the connection, regardless of the environment. So regardless if this is a moving vehicle, regardless if this is a fixed building in a space, inside that building, a hotel room, or maybe a city even, right? Regardless of that, going back, we are multisensory creatures. We perceive and build our reality through the senses. And biologically speaking, our senses or our ability to have sensation is directly correlated to our perception and to our attention. So what we're going to start, and today what we do is just to influence attention. Where we're evolving again with Sensory 2.0 is, okay, how do we use attention and perception to drive new behaviors or to help empower people during those moments that they need it the most? And I think that's where we have an opportunity really to expand our definition of where we design for the senses. We already do, whether we are cognizant and have the intention and the science or evidence to back up what we're doing or not. But ultimately, when Jo mentioned about product and company and brand differentiation, for example, within hotel sub-brands, I think that sensory profiling brands further expands the ability to ensure that those visual changes are congruent with the expectations of the consumer.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Ari. We have a final question. Virginia, is the boutique hotel design similar to the co-living space design? I would probably recommend, Virginia, that you sign up to my colleague's webinar. He's going to be hosting one on flexible living, I understand. And that will probably be looking at the similarities between hotels, co-living, apart hotels, build to rent, and how that hotelization or hospitality-led design is influencing the residential space. So I'm sure one of my colleagues who is on the call will be able to send further information about that. But interesting question. So thank you for asking. I am going to wrap up our webinar today. As we are 2 minutes closer to 3 o'clock. Understand we all have very busy lives, so I just have a few closing slides to run you guys through. I would like to highlight my next webinar on the 13th of February at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Will be on branded residences. I would love to see you all there. And please do sign up using the link that's been popped into the chat. And next week, in fact, BHN is going to be in Lisbon supporting our first event of 2023, Recharge. Recharge is in its 5th year and it moves to a different European city every time. In fact, we will be looking at the co-living and boutique hotel sector at this event. The first day, we will be visiting 2 5-star hotels as part of the property tours on day 1. So we'll be looking at other asset classes too. And the agenda on day 2 will include a workshop on creating a master plan for a warehouse neighborhood close to the Recharge venue. I thought it would be very appropriate to flag, seeing as we have been talking about design today. We still have some tickets available and they can be bought following the link into the chat. I'd like to welcome a new colleague, Stephanie. She has joined the IHM team, and I'm really looking forward to seeing Steph work very closely with all of you over the year. And if you would like to hear more information about our webinars or any of our in-person events, then I suggest you get in touch with my colleague, Katie. Her details are up on your screen there. And her details have also been popped into the chat, and Stephanie is even tuning in. Hi, Steph. So all that's left for me to do today is say thank you. Thank you to Joe. Thank you to Tom. Thank you to Ari for sharing your insights, thoughts and observations today. Thank you to Like Magic for sponsoring this session. You can follow us all on social media. As I mentioned, our panelists' LinkedIn profiles have been popped into the chat there. And we are going to leave this webinar open for an extra 2 minutes to allow our audience members to follow up on any of the links that we have popped into the chat today. But I bid you farewell, enjoy the rest of your week, and I will see you back here on the 13th of February when we talk about branded residences. Take care, everyone.